Welcome back to another special segment of Nuestra Esquina, which is a conversations that we're having across the U.S. with amazing Latinx leader voices. We have an amazing set of speakers and panels that we're going to be talking about, and especially some of the specific issues that we've skirted around in different segments and different experiences. But this one especially is going to be a fire one. So get ready. Go grab your water, go grab your cafecito, whatever you need to do, because we're about to get started. So with that said, I want to do an extra welcome with you all. And of course, an extra welcome to our amazing panelists here. So we're going to start with our origin story, and we're going to let you all introduce yourself to the audience of LTX Quest. So with that said, are you all ready? Yeah,
yes.
I think so, right?
I think so. Let's do this.
All right. So Jessyka, we're going to start with you.
Great.
To share your story.
Estamos en familia. You know, it was funny because I was like in class, you know, when you're in class and you're like, pick me last.
Look away.
And then I was like trying not to make eye contact, and here we are.
Jessyka.
Well,
tell us more about your origin stories and what are you currently working on, and how did your passion for that really lead you to that as well?
Okay, I will try not to take up too much time. My name is Jessyka Castillo. Where do I start? So I identify as an Afro-Latina. My parents are both Dominican, from the Dominican Republic originally. I am a native of Miami, Florida, and we are in Miami, Florida today.
Yes, we are.
So welcome to my city. Who's here? Who here is from Miami? Am I the only one? Okay, so that I get the pleasure of hosting the new tech into Miami. It's been really nice. And so, yes, I'm originally from here. I actually originally started my career as a publicist in entertainment and lifestyle. And then I went back, got my master's in engineering because I saw where technology was moving. And I currently work for the federal government, and I serve today as a chief of staff for the market development and intelligence division. And so I've had many roles in tech, from a cloud engineer to a business development to senior leadership advisor on DEIA initiatives, which was huge within the last year or two, so can speak a lot to that. And yeah, so many accolades. Most recently, just modeled for Miami Swim Week, which when you asked for a passion, I was really excited about that. And just really into philanthropy, worship, and fitness and financial gains. That is my season. That's what I'm here about. So I'm happy that we're talking about it as Latinx and how we can continue to grow as a community and propel each other and support each other in those goals.
And I love how you're sitting next to Maria, because you were one of the most recent folks I met in Miami, and we totally connected with being, Latinas in tech and the community. And Maria right here was one of the first people I met when I first moved from the East Coast to the West Coast in San Francisco, where we met at another gathering of just amazing Latinas coming in and talking tech, right? Being able to feel in a place that we're represented. And Maria, now it's been almost 6 years, right?
I would say, maybe a little over 6.
Yes, probably. We're aging ourselves. But now tell us about
youth.
Tell us about Maria, your background. What are you passionate? And for the folks who may not also, we're also meeting for the first time. So tell us a little bit more about you, Maria.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lili. Jessyka, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico.
Let's go.
So we're right there, our neighbor's island. My name is Maria Cuba, but I'm Puerto Rican. Everybody thinks I'm Cuban. I love Cuba, however, I've been there a lot. So from Puerto Rico, La Isla del Encanto, I was born there but raised in Worcester, Massachusetts. And Worcester is a town about an hour from Boston, with a lot of Latinos, a lot of people from Brazil, from Portugal, a lot of Italians. So there's a really mixed, rich town. So growing up, I was around, all sort of different identities and cultures, and I really loved that. And but as it happens for a lot of people from Puerto Rico, I have actually spent most of my life coming and going. So a little bit of time in Puerto Rico, then a little bit of time in the States. More recently, I had spent 10 years in the Bay, where I met you, and I met you also, Amber. And Currently, I work for Airbnb. So I'm the director of community partnerships at Airbnb, and I'm working with the amazing team of just folks that are really committed to communities and, doing the work. And I think that job is a great fit for me because when I first came into tech, for the ways of the law. So law is my background. And I came to tech at Airbnb really early. I was a host. I had no idea the company was tiny. And I applied to work there. And, 10, 11 plus years later, here I am. One of the most tenure employees right now at the company. What really brought me into the Latinx space was the challenge of my identity when I got to the West Coast. So I've always been, the girl from Puerto Rico, and in the East Coast, that means one thing. But when I was in the West Coast, it was like nobody from Puerto Rico. It was completely different. And I kind of discovered this sense of being Latina that I had not owned before. And it really just brought up this whole new vision for me of what it was to be me. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so through that, I was just instantly committed to advancing the issues for our community, mostly through sponsorship. I'm a big believer in sponsorship, mentorship, philanthropy, and just generally being outspoken. Whenever there is a silence that needs to be filled because things are being left unsaid, trying to come in, trying to be brave and say the things that I believe need to be said.
100%. And if our owning our power really starts with owning our voices and owning our narratives. So in the theme of owning our narratives, owning our voices, Hassan, I know you're definitely not only doing that, but also helping the youth be able to do that. So, but before we get there, tell us a little bit more about Hassan, your background, your passions.
So Dr. Hassan Brown, thanks for having me. This is going to be really dope. Having a good time already. Born and raised in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is it has its own character, and so I always got to lead with that. But my origin story actually begins, over 100 years ago in Westmoreland, Jamaica. I come from a lineage of carpenters and maids or domestics, however you want to call it. My family emigrated from Jamaica to Panama to work on the canal, as many folks from the Caribbean did during that time. That was really a way for us to really build some sort of economic kind of a nest egg. And then about maybe 50 years ago or so, we emigrated to the States, and so we planted our flag in Brooklyn. My mom, my tia, all the old heads, as I call them. They really set the foundation for me and really set my mind around what my identity was. I walk through spaces, what people see first is I'm a black man, right? But culturally, I walk that line between being Afro-Latino and also being of the Caribbean diaspora, right? And also on my father's side, African American. So, I've been in spaces where we have contentious conversations and I'm sitting there what should I do? I'm always wrestling with it. But most of my work, and even going back to my great-grandfather, I've been doing some research on him. I'm trying to unpack and figure out some more of my history. And I found out that he was a philanthropist in some ways, right? We didn't have the language for it, or we didn't apply it to the work that he was doing. But he was a farmer, right? So and also a carpenter. So he would lend his skills to folks in the community, often free of charge, because we didn't have means. Folks in the community didn't have means either. As a farmer, he gave produce to folks who needed it, right? And so in some ways, it's kind of dope because I'm just learning about his story and I'm seeing the work that I'm doing now. And I'm just is this in my DNA? Is this, you know what I'm saying? Because I worked in education and social services for much of my career. I was a CPS, I was a child protective specialist for a number of years in New York. Really tough job, also very rewarding. I enjoyed working with kids and families, first and foremost. But the casework kind of dynamic, it didn't quite fill my soul, but I still wanted to find a way to work with young people and work with families, so I became a teacher. I taught for a number of years in New York City public schools. Tough ass job, right?
Sure.
Before transitioning to more leadership roles in education. I still tell myself when I retire, I want to go back into the classroom. I'm gonna be the old man, sitting down, teaching from the desk. but I'm gonna be teaching though. But I worked in education for a number of years, administration, and then I moved into more the philanthropic space, working in education philanthropy. Did this across the country, a number of spaces in the rural South. and then in the Bay, and then most recently in Boston, and now I'm in DC. But the ethos of much of my work has always been about how can I take the resources that are sitting here, right, and marshal them to communities that have been historically, systematically, intentionally locked out, and presently locked out. And so I bring that same kind of like mindset or approach to careercatalyst.org, which is the work that I'm currently doing, which is really thinking about, at its core, it's economic empowerment, workforce, career inspiration, exploration undertaking. But I'm featuring Black, Latinx, Indigenous STEM professionals or STEAM professionals even. I really want to expand the tent of how we define STEAM, what kind of roles are STEAM roles, what STEAM professionals look like.
You got two new
episodes.
I'm sitting here, I'm like, wow, we're so much more alike than we are different. We haven't even gotten to you yet. I'm like, let's start this over. I gotta tell you about what I did. I told you not to go first.
I'm telling you, like we're gonna have a whole follow-up session. Like watch out for the part 2 is coming at y'all.
Part 2, the behind the scenes.
Right? But Career Catalyst is it's a career inspiration and exploration endeavor where I really want to introduce young people to BIPOC STEM professionals so they can kind of like see what they can be, right? And for even more specifically, knowing about the current roles, right? And like the roles, the jobs of the future, right? Innovation economies, the pandemic, we had frontline workers, the unsung heroes for about 6 months. And then there was get back into the kitchen, get back into right? But I want us to be able to have a seat, in these emerging economies. We were locked out of the first industrial era. We ain't gonna have that again, right?
Nope.
And so we're gonna be in roles of decision-making power to open the door, keep the door open, right? So that's really what Career Catalyst is. It's about showing folks the jobs of today, the possible jobs of tomorrow, and then giving young people the power to decide for themselves if they want to pursue these things or not. Just having the power of choice, that's phenomenal by itself.
I think that in owning your power, I think a lot of the times is trying to fit into those existing spaces that were never designed, right, for a lot of our community. And so, what is it that we're going to reimagine and create something new? And Amber here has been actually, the way I met you was through Latino Community Foundation of we're just having the opportunity to question power, but to also own our power as a community. So Amber, with that said, please introduce yourself with your origin story, which I know it's hard to do in a
I know.
But please tell us more about also what you're doing now.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you. I said that's kind of in the beginning, but it really does feel like being in familia, in community, and I think that's what makes these sort of conversations really comfortable. So my name is Amber Gonzalez Vargas. I'm the daughter of Marco Gonzalez and Celia Vargas, 2 immigrants from Peru. My family is indigenous. We are Quechua, the indigenous peoples of that region, of the Andes. And I think from a very early age, I really, really owned that. And Maria, kind of you hearing your experience coming to California was my reality living and growing up in California. I think there is a beautiful, large Mexican community in California. Growing up as a young Peruana in the Central Valley in Stockton, California, I would often go I'm Peruvian. What part of Mexico is that? Oh, it's not in it's not in Mexico. I was oh, so you're European. Also, no, And so it was one of those things that from a very early age, I was I remember being 10 years old. Hi, Amber, Peruvian, because it was so front and forward for me because I felt this, I was so proud of my parents and my grandparents that I was I have to show up for them in some way. And that way for me was just stating it in a room, stating it as a little kid in my classroom with my teacher. And so I think that was very formative in me figuring out what it is that I wanted to do. I've always known that I loved supporting people. For me, and I didn't realize it until recently, having such a close, tight-knit immigrant family here in the US made me feel I love the sense of security, safety, support that they give me. How can I replicate that everywhere that I go? And so when I go to undergrad, I really thought it was international relations because I was this is perfect. It's gonna connect, Peru is international for me, and I live here in the US, and that's exactly what's gonna bring it together. And it wasn't until a semester before I graduated from undergrad, there was a huge Black Lives Matter protest on my campus, which completely changed the trajectory of my career. At the time, I was working at our Center for Student Leadership, so I had a lot of conversations with those folks, with people from my minor program, with friends, and I was like, what am I doing trying to go somewhere else in the world when there's so much work that needs to get done here? And that was a new shift, and I remember thinking like, okay, how the heck? I was supposed to be a Fulbright scholar. I was going to join the Peace Corps.
Oh, you fancy.
But I was
going too.
But I was like, that was my vision for myself. And then all of a sudden, like everything that I thought to be true shifted after that. And so I remember I went on LinkedIn. I typed in philanthropy, all these different things. I ended up finding this woman who was working at Google. And through these multiple webs of connection, I ended up working at the Latino Community Foundation. And that for me, I spent 5.5 years there. And what I really genuinely could call for a long time was my dream job. I was creating community, I was building community, I was working alongside community. And I think what was amazing about that is I was meeting folks like all of y'all who felt so passionately about it, and I was able to connect them with grassroots nonprofits. And about 2 years ago, 2020, pandemic, right? What happened? I had a pause. Everybody had a pause. And I was like, what do I want to do now? And so I ended up applying for grad school. So I'm a dual degree student today. I'm doing my MBA at MIT Sloan and my MPA at Harvard Kennedy School.
And tell him what your role is at MIT as a student leader.
And I am the incoming co-president for my school, basically, at MIT. So it's really exciting.
The first Latina, right?
First Latina. And so it's really exciting to kind of continue to build out spaces.
First Peruvian?
Probably. But not
Probably,
but not the last.
But not the last.
But one of those things too about that is, I keep talking about it as beyond the dream. Right. Like with my parents, we had this collective dream as an immigrant family. I lovingly call myself a US-born Peruvian immigrant because as the oldest child, I did a lot of things alongside my parents. And so I understood the immigrant experience even though I hadn't, here in the US, even though I didn't actually know the immigration experience. And so now, I did the thing. Our American dream with my parents was, do good in school, get into a good university, get a good job. I did it. And now I'm living in this new space where I'm like, who am I? And what is my American dream? Yes. Separate of my parents. And so I feel very much like I'm figuring that out right now. I'm engaged. Like my fiance is he's at a different income level than I was. And so we're doing things more than I've ever been able to do before. And I'm like, what is my life? And it's exciting, but I think again, it's a testament to being able to build off of the dreams of our parents.
So with that said, on the topic of questioning construct, the American dream and identity, let's bring Jessyka back into this conversation on that topic, especially if you can expand also just on your own upbringing as well, because I know we started tapping on it.
Yeah. So I'm the chocolate baby in my family. So my mother is fair, very fair skin, probably lighter than you. And then my sisters are, we go from there, and it's 4 of us. So it's everyone gets a little bit darker, but no one's as dark as me. The darkest is probably maybe a little bit darker than you. So growing up, I had that very early experience. It was my father and me. And he had, I also only spoke Spanish. I was an ESOL. So you have to understand my experience is that I'm trying to put the words together because it was so much emphasis on my skin color early on.
When you were growing up?
I remember my teacher sent us an emergency contact or something. It was already filled in with black. And my dad wrote this whole letter, but I'm a kid, right? About she's Hispanic and all these things. And he's take this to your attendance class person, the office.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I was giving her the paper, but you remember these things as a kid, And so she opened the letter and she just looked at me and she was like, okay, I'll take care of it. And when I got home, my dad was like, did you give her the letter? What happened? And he was reaffirming. He was always I didn't understand it, but he would always tell me that I was so beautiful. He would always tell me that I was so, he spent extra time on me. And I appreciate that. And I mean, he did it to all of us, but I think he understood something that I didn't know yet. And then obviously in school, I grew up in Miami, so everybody's Latino and Cuban, and it's predominantly many Cuban and different, but it was always white Latinas. There was not any of me's. So it was interesting. I'm an Esau, and then one thing we don't talk about is being Black in our culture, right? And even if you are that, I had to learn that through life taught me that. Which is why I think maybe Hassan and I have that in common. I'm interested to figure out, like, my father's side is from San Cristobal, which is rich in Afro. And then my mom is from, like, the mountains, and it's more Euro. And my grandfather had blue eyes and all those things. So, so within all of that, now as I'm growing up, I learned I was Black. No doubt about it. It's like, who are you married to? It's so many questions that I don't see other people have that experience. And even amongst us, I see you're so friendly, or, there's this assumption of that I'm going to be angry or assertive or those characteristics. So I have definitely had to experience many things of the sort. Now, I think one thing that we all have in common as we're talking about this is that we speak up.
Right. Yes.
I'm always speaking up. I'm like very big on, I don't like the way you spoke to me, or volunteering to lead something, a Latinx ERG, like very big on leadership and speaking up. And I can say that I am the first. My sister and myself are the first in our family who have that voice of confidence, right? Like, we went through the American dream. I was born in New York, right? So my parents did the whole, migrate with their student visas and stayed, and so I come from that. To circle back to just being a Black Latina, I don't see myself. I think, Lili, we just talked about this. I got casted for a swimwear show for Miami Swim Week. It was a beautiful experience. And when I walked out, I felt everybody clapping. And I thought it was because I was a curvy girl. Because I have so much Latina in me. I listen to everything. I lead with Latina. The way I cook, everything about me is Latina. So I had a growth spark and a journey in my whole life, learning that, like, culturally, there's a huge difference about the African-American experience. And yet I don't know how to make the cultural dishes of African-American dishes. I would love to, but that wasn't what I was exposed to. I know how to make mango, salami, el no tres golpe. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. You understand?
Yeah.
So I think that I felt the need. Very much in high school, I saw the division. For some reason, we all started going to magnet schools and all that. So now you don't go to school with your community. And I saw the emphasis of people needing me to align to something that I didn't see that being required of others, right? It was like, you had to pick, or you're selling us out, or like, I will say this, that I felt like Latinos that were white get a different experience, and yet they use the N-word and feel comfortable doing that. And I still have a very big issue with that. And so there was a lot of things that I felt torn about. My best friends were like, no, she's Dominican. Like, everyone would be like, she's not Black, she's Dominican. Like, and I didn't understand what that meant.
Right.
I didn't understand what that meant. But then it got to the point where, with Black Lives Matter and everything else, I had to say, hey guys, listen, I'm gonna have a Black kid. This needs to matter to you, or you don't care about me. So if you don't see me as Black, like, my life is at risk every day. If you don't see that, if we don't get real about that, if we don't get real about that in my employment, I am the least paid currently on my team. I just found that out. And in our Latinx community in tech, the Latinx is the least paid.
Right.
So I'm actually probably getting more because I'm Black. And that's constantly happening to me.
Yeah.
That's constantly happening to me. I don't even know. I remember when I didn't know what an HBCU was. I didn't know what that was because I don't come from that, but yet the expectation was you didn't go to one. So there were so many cultural norms that I had to figure out for myself. My parents didn't have that college experience to give it to me. I'm gonna wrap it up because I can talk about being an Afro-Latina. I'm gonna write a book.
This is so rich because I know there's probably a lot of
things going
on.
But I think the one thing that would be helpful is, as I'm gonna finish the model story because it was most recent. It was on Sunday, and I never, and Amber, I just want to say to you, the American experience for me is something I recently, right after COVID, I went through a serious deep depression and anxiety because my life went on pause. And I didn't know what that looked like, right? Because I did the same thing. I did the master's. I'm the first one to have a master's. I did all the accolades, right? I did all the things to bury security. Even the job I have now is very much rooted in how we were raised to have security as a thing, right? But like, is that my passion? So I started to write out, like, how do you show up in your creative self? Like, what are the things that matter to you? And modeling and writing a book were the two that I identified. And it just came to me. Like, when I tell you my story about how I got casted, we'll talk about that later. It came to me. And I just want to just affirm you that your American dream is whatever it is that you want it to be, because our parents paved the way and everyone before them to make sure that we have the opportunity. And so I just want to, give that to you. Yep. And then, so as the model, I come out, again, how I ended up there. I haven't even been a model.
We'll get those in behind the scenes.
Yeah, I haven't even been a model for a week, but I went from no modeling experience, 0, to walking in Miami Swim Week, which is like the highest.
That's amazing.
Right? As a plus size model, right? So like, that's another thing. We'll talk about that. So as I'm walking out, everyone's clapping. This has been my life, my whole life. This is what I want y'all to understand. Like, Afro-Latinas, this Afro, not the ones that are like, I'm 5 shades lighter than you and still get this Afro-Latina. No. You still have, people know you're Latina. Talking to the ones that like you walk in and you're ambiguous and you don't know what you are, right? So I walk and I remember I saw everybody clapping and I was just like, why are they clapping? Okay, it's because I'm the curvy girl. So I as I'm walking down, I'm like, oh, wow, this is so fun. I wasn't nervous at all. I asked my friend, hey, why do you think they were clapping so much? And then he's like, 'cause you're Black. And it hit me because as much as I would love to understand my Blackness, I subscribe to it, first and foremost. Like, I'm all about it, I love that I'm Black. Let's get that clear. Where's the camera? I love being Black, okay? As much as I love being Latina, I love the diversity in me. I think that's what makes me, I love that. The adversity it's taught me has made me a badass, So I'm gonna wrap it up really quick. So what I was gonna say is just that when he said that, I just realized like there's a whole nother layer of responsibility on me now. Because they've never seen a Black curvy girl, like Black like me, in the swimwear.
Well, they're gonna have to get ready to see more of that.
But they don't see me like that in tech either. So it's like it all applies to those things.
Do you think your friend was right though? Like he shared his perspective on why he thinks they were clapping.
I looked at the show. I was the only one.
You were the only one.
So it was 3 shows in a row. So they sat through it for like it's a 30-minute show. I was the only one.
So on that note too of the identity, especially because we've worked also in the diversity and inclusion spaces. We're trying to have the conversation of identity, and sometimes it's like, are we othering ourselves even further? And so just curious, I think you earlier, before this, you were talking about your own experience too, growing up, of what your mom told you, right? And so maybe you can just share a little bit, and then we'll love to see, feel free to jump in and see, because this is such an important conversation, especially as we see it in so many different layers of our identities, and our identities are just different facets, how we show up in our professional work, personal, like any types of new activities that we want to do. It's how others are viewing us, how we view ourselves, the cognitive dissonance in that. So I know, Maria, you've had some.
I mean, there's so much that I could say about it. I will tell you this: identity is nothing if not complex. A person has so many layers to them, and there are the things, the cues that we get from how you look, right?
Right.
What you can't change, the things about you. In my case, is like my skin and my hair and my weight and my gender and the things that everybody sees when they meet me. And then there are the layers of complexity about my identity. I've always thought of myself as indigenous. Is the one thing that it's very close to my heart. And when we had the opportunities to do DNA tests, I was like, oh my God, here comes confirmation. This is gonna be great. And I get it, and then it goes 12%. And 12% what? Indigenous Puerto Rico. And I'm not gonna lie, I was disappointed. I was like, I wanted this to be 50%. Yeah. I wanted this to be, and then there it was, 5% Irish. Like 5% Jewish, 5% French. I was like, who is this person? Because it's like,
I gotta ask the aunties what's happening over here.
And it really made me again, I think the theme I'm bringing here today for me is this question of identity. Is like who I am. I was telling a story when I was a little kid. I used to live in Worcester, Massachusetts. I had lots of friends. And one day walking home, a friend of mine who was African-American, I was like 5, he was like 6 or 7. So it's like, what are you? And he goes like, you're pretty dark. Your hair is really like just straight. Like I'm not understanding. And I went home and I asked my mom and she gave me this quick answer. Oh, you are what he sees. And as a kid, I went and repeated, and he said that was satisfactory. And as I grew up, I have had many reactions to that answer. There were times where I was like, no, I'm not. Like I am all these great things and I need to show you, right? Like you are not gonna know just by looking at me that I'm, X, Y, and Z smart, or that I do these things, or that I have these gifts or these talents, or that I feel this certain way about who I am. Those are things that you need to get to know me. But then in time, I realized 2 important things. I don't have a responsibility to constantly be showing you who I am. I have nothing to prove, right? You want to know who I am? Get to know me. Spend time with me, gain interest in the things that are important to me, in my community, in my culture, and the things that I show up for and how I show up for them. And the other thing is, no matter how great of a job I do at constantly reminding you about all the things that are great about me, there is something that happens within you that I cannot control. Your biases, your reactions, your previous experiences, the things that you've been taught about people like me. And it is really the dialogue, right? The intersection of you and me that leads to us understanding each other. But that doesn't come naturally because the world is constantly trying to assign you these identities, and it gets exhausting. I sometimes don't want to be the underrepresented woman in tech. I know I am, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not saying, it's like, I'm not saying that I'm oblivious to the fact that there's not a lot of people like me in tech, especially in roles at levels like I am. But sometimes I don't want to lead with that. I want to lead with the fact that I am a great mentor. That's the most important thing to me. Or I want to lead with the fact that I come from a background where I had 2 sisters with disabilities who couldn't speak, who couldn't walk. And the privilege and time that I got to spend with them while they were alive has marked my life deeply. I would say more deeply than my Latinidad, right? Yeah. So maybe I want to lead with that. Maybe I want to lead with the fact that English is my second language, although I was raised all over the place, right? Or, that I'm incredibly committed to the environment, and every day I feel like, why are we not screaming at the top of our lungs, save this planet, right? So I don't want others to impose the idea that they have on me. I want to choose how I show up and when I show up. And that is not something that is granted to us, because in your experience, it wasn't granted to you. You were there and you felt this pride of you bringing your whole self there. and people were clapping because you were Black, right? Which, again, not true. It's true, but is that the way that you have chosen to show up, you know? And it's difficult when you have to kind of like always carry these identities with you. The last thing I would say around identity is that we need to have deeper conversations about individual identity versus collective identities. You know, the way to heal is to understand the difference between those two. I can have a relationship with you no matter what identities you bring to the table, if with that you bring respect, understanding, and interest in getting to know me, if I'm able to connect to other areas of your life where there is synergy, right? Because there's so many intersections that you bring to the table. That doesn't mean that I don't recognize that there are macro identities, identities of groups, identities of complete groups of people that carry with them themselves a lot of things that we need to acknowledge and be aware of in how we move in the world. So it is that balance of, I see you as an individual, but I also recognize the macro identities that you carry, and you need to recognize mine and create respect amongst them that I think is the key. And nothing is more important within the Latinidad than doing that, because otherwise we're always going to be segmented, right? There's always going to be this segmentations and these groups that we want to fit in. No, there's some macro identities that we carried, and then there's some individual ones, and both of them are important to recognize and to honor.
I think it's the honoring, right? And honoring your choices, how you would, for us to also be able to honor our own existence and our own, to your point of identity, because we were talking about earlier, I'm like, what do I identify as, like the deepest, right? I'm like an immigrant, and then being indigenous, right? And then I'm like, wait, where's the woman and where's the other parts? And it is exhausting, right? When you show up to places where you just want to look, I just want to talk about X, Y, and Z. Like, I don't even, okay, that's what you're seeing, but we got other things to talk about. And on that note, we got other things to additionally bring up on this conversation. What you brought up, Hassan, which is like, as we're going into this building new economies, right? As you were mentioning earlier of why you're doing what you're doing, of creating that opportunity. One of the parts that we've had in different conversations in Nuestra Esquina is also just the challenges that we have in our own families with our relationship to money. So you were talking about, first of all, the whole other conversation, the pay gap, we need to bring that back and really go into more of that, because it is true. And what can we do about it? And there is that relationship that we each have with money as well that may have come from our families. And now in this space where we're in, coming out of the pandemic, we're going into a recession. So Hassan, tell us a little bit more of your background with that. And as we are in this more digital first, creating new economies, what can we do to be leading?
Yeah, sure. And I just quickly want to just comment, like, I mean, Maria, like your what you shared was so powerful, right? Like, I think about the amount of power that you were able to exercise once you kind of like didn't allow like the narrative that was being forced on you to define who you were, right?
Right.
In a lot of ways, that's freeing, right? And I will say, like, to the point you're talking about othering, right? I think othering, actually, this might be a contrary opinion. I think othering is okay. Like, if you look at me, I don't look like a traditional, I'm generalizing here. I don't look white because I'm not. I don't look Asian because I'm not, right? And that's okay. But if you treat me differently, if you treat me like I'm diminished or lesser than, that's when me and you're gonna have a problem, right? Exactly. So I think there's beauty amongst like the diversity. I think our differences are what make us collectively beautiful, individually beautiful. And if we can honor that, then let's other away. But if you see me and you say, oh, he's a black man, so I'm gonna and then with that comes all the stereotypes and assumptions that are made. That's when there's a problem, right? But I think being able to like really see our differences, our otherness, and uplifting it, I'm cool with that. But it's really like that. How do you act on those those perceptions? For sure. Right. So growing up, like for me, my mom, my tia, my aunt, she raised me. She worked 2 jobs, so which meant like she went to work at 7 a.m., came home 10 p.m. And so she was very much a strong Black woman provider. And so I saw the relationship with money really was one where it was about really sustaining the family and ensuring like, that we never wanted for anything, right? The bills are always paid. Food was always on the table. We actually were pretty fortunate. I didn't realize this like as a kid, but having like, an annual summer vacation, right? Going to Disney World and going to like, water parks and to the beach, all those kind of things. I thought everyone was doing that, right? Until I come back to school in like, August, September, talk to my homies like, yo, like, what'd you do this summer? I just sat in front of the TV and kind of chilled out, right? So I realized like, the catch there was like, she was putting so much of herself into like building this life for us so that we can have like the experiences that we would have with her. But, like the day to day, we didn't really see her that much, my sister and I, right? So for me, I kind of like always walked that line of like, damn, like I know she's working hard, and I wish I could have like seen her more, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, as I got older, I always said to myself, okay, I want to have a career that allows me to make enough money where I can feel self-sufficient and also allow me time to, be with my family, right? It's like, being a CEO doesn't always afford you that opportunity. And so what I've really done in this season of life, and it took many years of learning this, right, is how to take like purposeful pauses. And that could be like, 10 minutes, half an hour. It could be a day where you just block off, like, you know what? No meetings today. I might still do like emails or whatever. Yeah. But I'm really thinking about health and wellness and like, what comes from financial prosperity, like what that affords you. But if I'm making all this money and I have no outlet to like really enjoy it, if I'm not spending time with like my family and my friends, then what's it all for?
Right.
And so my first job, I was making, you know what? It was like sub-30s, right? This is me with a master's in forensic psych in New York. I made $32,000. I was like, hey, can we maybe bump it up? I actually went back to negotiate on it, going back to like speaking up.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, if you work maybe like give us about 2 years, maybe we'll bump it up to $34,000.
Wow.
Bump it up to $34,000.
With your master's?
With a master's, right?
In New York City.
In New York City.
You were working in like a university?
No, I was working in the social services sector, right?
Everybody went, oh, yeah. Oh.
So that's part of the problem.
But even that's the problem.
A huge part of the problem. Nonprofit, social, government, like all of those.
And that's what we tend to lean towards because we understand it and we care.
Or we were recipients of it.
Yeah, exactly. So respectfully, I was like, no, thank you. And I began doing my CPS work, right? And then from there, I moved into education. As I began to make more money, I began to think about, okay, now I gotta start saving because I came from like, it's almost like a trauma, I think, when you realize that like you come from, not humble beginnings, but also like not much means. You always kind of walk around, like at least I do, with almost like a fear that it can be taken from you at any moment, right? So I gotta store it. I gotta store it away because you never know. This white supremacy, you never know when they're gonna take it from me, right? And so that's kind of been like the mindset that I've been operating in for a good number of years. And then I began to look around me, like, and maybe like the pandemic is part of that as well. But, as a kid and as a young adult, I sought like, financial advice from folks. And it was always like, save. But then I'm looking like on social media, I'm looking at the news, I'm seeing people who are like jet setting. You save your money, I'm gonna go spend it. I'm gonna go to the Caymans, right? And I'm like, wait a minute, I couldn't square those two. So I said, okay, I wanna go to the Caymans too. You know what I'm saying?
Can you have both and have a little bit of balance and enjoy life?
Right, so I've learned, I think growing up, money was more seen as a debits and credits, right? You get a bill, you pay it. Whereas now I'm understanding that like financial literacy and just like being financially free means that you can see money as a tool or even debt as a tool. Debt was like a bad word, right? You didn't want to have debt. But there are ways to use debt to leverage it to get assets, right? Which can appreciate, right? As long as like they're appreciating assets, right? But that's a new way of thinking for me, right? So I'm looking at investments, real estate, looking at things like, art, right? These are things that, my family, like, I'm trying to educate that to the next generation, the folks coming up behind me, but yeah, there's no
You're living at your and their wildest dreams at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think what you mentioned just reminded me of my childhood with my mom, where my mom, I remember she used to like literally lock us up with my sister when we were really kids because she had to work 2 jobs and we didn't have anybody to take care of us. So I just remember not seeing her on the weekends where she would have to, I would be able to go to the beach with like our cousins and stuff like that, but she would never come because that's the time that she worked the hardest. Because of that, on the financial side, she's like, save.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, no, but I also want to spend and enjoy what I'm doing. Like this is the work that we're doing.
You never know, you gotta hold it. Yeah.
Right. And so like I've had to have that conversation with her to also be like, love you, Mom, I respect you, but like I'm trying to live a different life.
Yeah.
and I want you to enjoy it with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that enjoying part is like a little bit on the healing part that we've had to do with money. And I know especially for you, Amber, as you were leading the giving circle, right? Where I know that there's data that shows that Latinx in general are givers, especially in philanthropy. We do it within our families, within organizations. So we'd love to hear a little bit more of your experience now, also leaving work, being a grad student, talking about debt and all that.
Thoughts, so many thoughts right now. But to that one right now, I'll just quickly say that philanthropy in its traditional sense, philanthropy as a word, all it means is love for the people. And you gave a beautiful example of your grandfather who gave back and was philanthropic. Yes, he was philanthropic. He doesn't have to give millions of dollars in the traditional philanthropic sense as we know it today to be a philanthropist. And I think that for me was one of the most pivotal takeaways from having a career with Latino Community Foundation was the way that we redefine philanthropy, because Latinx communities, immigrant communities, Black communities, like we are givers because that's all we know how to do. And I think this is touching on something that that came up with everything that was just said right now is how do we continue to decolonize these systems? Like when you two were speaking, right, how do we decolonize beauty? Like for me, one of the things I remember growing up it's been an uphill battle, and my family and I were learning how to decolonize beauty in our own way. But it's like, I remember growing up, don't straighten your hair, you're gonna look, te vas a ver muy india. I'm gonna look too indigenous. Cuidado que don't go outside, you're gonna get too dark. Right? All these different things. I was like, I just wanna be a kid.
Right.
Right? And like straightening your hair is fashion right now. Let me just straighten my hair and not get complaints about it. And I feel the same way now with wealth, honestly. And so I remember this last semester, I've been doing a lot of soul searching since I got into my MBA program. I'm like, who am I in this new space? Because it is very different from where I was before. And I think one of the things that really came out for me when I was sitting in my economics classes and my accounting classes, and I brought this, and I bring this into this space because I feel like folks like us are the ones that can actually answer this question. When we think about economics, when we think about accounting, when we think about our financial systems, who was it built by? The way that we use it today. It was built by people, by white people, European people who built their wealth through colonization and slavery. That is what the economics and the way that we use it today was built off of those systems. And so when I think about like access to like BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color today, like there is deeper rooted reasons why we are not benefiting from that wealth, right? And so when I think about like my own relationship with money, it's tricky. You know, growing up at a very early age, my parents, after my maternal grandparents passed away, they decided that my mom was gonna stay home and my dad was gonna work. And it would have been more financially responsible for my mom to go to work because she had a bachelor's and my dad didn't. I had a high school degree. But my mom was the one who came to this country speaking English. And they decided as a couple that it made sense for my mom to support us, my brother and I, in figuring out this new education system and figuring out what it means to live in this country. And so they did that. And I would say out of my mom's siblings, the 6 of them that are here in this country, we were growing up probably the least wealthy. But I have the most amazing memories and relationship with my family because of that decision that my parents made, you know? And so when I think about wealth today, it's tricky. Like I'm going into this new system, like of this new like financial level. And I think what's been interesting about it and what I'm trying to think about now, and I feel like, I mean, maybe y'all have opinions on this too, is like, how do we bring our family alongside this? Lili, you're telling us like you want your mom to be involved in it. Like, absolutely. And it's like, how do we in all of these different moments bring them alongside us? Because I feel like my biggest debt in my life is how do I repay my parents?
Yes.
Right? The second one is my MBA loans. But like, you know, but it's like, but my biggest debt is how
We need
do
to address policy.
Yes.
All right, we gotta attack that student debt.
and that's the thing too, right? It's like, how do we give back to these, in my case, right, whoever your caregivers were, whoever were those people in your life to do that. And how do we make sure that they're present in that space, right?
I think that that's so important as we are moving towards these new economies being created.
Yeah.
So, you know, that we're starting to see the cryptocurrencies of the world coming out of different needs, and where that's going, that's still we're exploring that as well. But there's also other types of financing that's been available. But a lot of the times it's not something, as you shared, it's been designed for certain people and groups, and there's been certain things that you got to check out before you're able to access it that were, designed in a way that's discriminatory. I think and as we go to closing, because I know, oh my gosh, this conversation, I told you this was going to be so good. I'm processing a lot because this is just really, really rich and deep. And thank you all for your first of all, for opening up and sharing your stories and the feelings, the sentiments with folks that we also just met some of you also. Thank you so much for that. But before we go and close, because I know we're a little bit over time, I do want to go back to the celebration aspect of, right? How do we bring my mom, bring your parents, bring the students, your family, your loved ones into this whole new world that we are really been, we might be the first ones in this tech industry or in this innovation, the education where we're at. But how do we celebrate our culture as we go forward? And if we can do it in kind of rapid fire of your call to action. And so, why don't we start with you, Jessyka? Does that work, or do you want me?
I can start.
All right,
I can start because I have two things.
All right,
but I'll be fast. So for me, the one that I was trying to touch on earlier with your points, and I think is increasingly important, is erasure of people within our community as well. Right? We touched a little bit on we can talk Black, Indigenous. We're represented here today, but we also need to represent the trans communities as well that are there. There is an erasure of so many people within our space. So I think for me, one of the biggest things to celebrate community is to continue to honor, identify, and uplift those folks and the people in our community who constantly get erased. And the second one is coalition building. I think one of the biggest tenets of white supremacy is to try and separate us and make us pick and choose a group. And that's the same thing across the Latinx community and beyond. And I say the beyond because working in philanthropy and being at an MBA program now, we're constantly pitted against each other. Who's gonna get more money? Who's gonna get more funding for something? Who's gonna get more visibility for something? When the reality is there is enough space and there is enough money to fill everybody's needs, there is somebody at top who is not doing it. And so it's about coalition building and working alongside each other. That is the true celebration, and that is where freedom comes.
Wow.
Yeah. I was sitting on that for a second.
I have so many feels because all of you I'm sitting here processing, downloading. But I'm having so many feels because I said one story and everybody had a different experience in the answer. And Hassan, I didn't forget when you said, are you sure that that's why they were clapping? I've been holding on to that because I'm like, am I sure? And I have to say that I have to maybe edit correct, right? There's a couple things that you but you're a Black man. And it's interesting, I always get that from people who are like me. But I don't necessarily get that from others, that reaction of wait, check yourself, right? Because I think I rob myself. And you made me realize that the designer is actually a Puerto Rican woman, Lila Nicole, and she casted me because of my confidence. She has 100% validated that for me. Told me that over and over. And even her peers, everyone are you're a sensation. And so I just want to thank you for taking that moment to kind of check me, because the person who said it, I think has now made me see it that way when the person who actually gave me the job has done so much work to validate me. So I think those are the things that I constantly see myself what is spiraling through those identity channels. Right. And it goes with the grouping and it goes with all these other things. So yeah, I can say with confidence that it was for my confidence, right? And so whatever anybody else felt, that's what they felt. And however they felt about it is how they felt.
However they saw you,
yes,
right?
Yes,
right.
Yeah, so thank you. Look at that, growth in the
live growth.
One thing that you said something else about jobs in our family. Interesting, when I told my dad that I did and I shared it with him, I was hesitant. I told everybody else before my parents. Because I got the exact reaction that I thought. He saw it and he was like, you look beautiful, but what about your job? There's that security. There's that fear of is she gonna actually go for this and then leave her secure job that, and I checked him on that. I said, this is not the moment for that. This is the moment for me to celebrate. But it took me a long time to get to the American dream vision for myself. Yeah. So I just want to remind you that people, even the ones that love you, I got so upset and it was really disappointing, but it was from a loving and protective place of his limitation and his and everything that they know. So that's something that therapy, I would say call to action. Is therapy. I went to therapy for a long time for family therapy, and unfortunately, I'm the only one who wanted to contribute to that part of growth. And so I think in our culture, we could really promote that because there's a ton of trauma, and our trauma is unique. People didn't have lives because they had to provide for others. My mom has been spending her whole life. She brought her whole family here off of one person. I don't know how they do it. I barely can make it through my work day. And like she brought her whole family. So that's the immigrant story, right?
Yeah.
And so, okay, I'll pause at that. And then cryptocurrency, when you're ready to talk about that, I'll talk about the Miami influence and the money and where it's coming from. And the fact that you said it correctly, like it's not built for us. And then there's that fear of how do I play with my money? Like I know people that don't even put money in the bank.
Right.
Let's talk about that, right? So I just want to, thank you for
we definitely got some great segments on that. So make sure you've been tuning in to cover that.
So I'll say something about fear and money. Talk about money. Because when we are afraid of things and we don't talk about it, those fears that compound it, they drown us. And we need to talk about money and we need to do it openly. And we need to shift our relationship with money. So many times I felt like money was something that in a way was dirty, that it wasn't like something that I should aspire to. It was somehow in conflict with my values and other things. None of that is true. I want to tell you right now, none of that is true. If you think that way, get it outside of your head. Let's talk about money. And then the one thing that I really want to say before I leave is we need to redefine success from individual to collective. We need to talk about the success of our communities, the success of our people, the success of our groups, of our families, because the idea of individual success is limiting. It only touches one person, especially if you don't have a plan about how you're going to use your success to elevate others. So the Latino community, and I will argue every community, I will argue the nation needs to rethink their relationship with success and start talking about collective success, communal success, how we uplift everybody up. How do we provide for everybody? How do we give opportunities for everybody? How do we educate everybody? Because otherwise, all we're doing is literally there's a huge, just dam and it has all these holes and we're trying desperately to fill them. No, we need to create a solution that is all-encompassing. Success is not about the individual, it's about the community. Our people, the Latino people, have so many gifts. We have so much to give. We have so many things in which we excel. I mean, look at music alone, right? #1 stream artist, I think, broke all the records. I heard of some guy, I don't know if I can mention his name, but it's some trapper, some little island here in the Caribbean. And let me tell you something. That success is contagious. Let's really, I sometimes read comments and I hear people saying, trying to bring shade to that. I'm like, no, let's really celebrate success as something collective. And let's really aim for collective success, community success, because that's how we make it. That's how we show the world how amazing we are.
Building that collective power and looking at, there's a concept of solidarity economics by Professor Pastor. Highly recommend because it really touches upon reevaluating our success, what we measure, right? And especially coming out of the pandemic, I know, at least for me personally, as you shared as well, it's like this reframing of what are we doing and why are we doing? So with that said, Doc from the block, you're gonna close us out. You're gonna drop the mic as soon as we're done because we are out of time, but this is an amazing conversation. What is your closing thought, the call to action that you want folks to leave with?
So I think the pandemic has taught me something that's really keen, and I think it really is a thread through a lot of what's been shared today. And just really, your 9 to 5 doesn't need to be what brings you joy. Mm-hmm. So really, use your time to find what brings you joy, find what gives you energy. If it's not your job, then If it's modeling, cool, right? If it's making YouTube video, whatever it is, right? But there's a way to really find your fulfillment through what you're actually find your passion, explore yourself, Because your job, your employer, like, that's not their priority, right? Like their job is not to have help their employees find their passion. Their mission is to either the social mission or to bottom line make money. And now we have the time and the agency, like the information age, the internet, right? You can learn any number of skills, right? You can really set yourself on a pathway to your own economic prosperity that isn't solely reliant on institutions to be your sole stream of income. People are democratizing. I mean, information is democratized. I think the rate of entrepreneurship has skyrocketed in the pandemic. Venture Forward recently had a survey result that found that of the 20 million startups currently in existence, 17% of those were started during the pandemic, right? So like that's 3.4 million, right? You can be one of those 3.4 million, right? And a startup or being an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you need to have something really grand. Just take a chance on yourself, explore your interests, and go deep there. And as far as like how do you bring family and community into these institutions and spaces? Bring them.
Literally,
bring your mom to work. Bring your guy. Bring them.
Yeah.
Bring them.
You heard your mom. I'm going to bring you.
Yeah.
I take her to all of my work anyway.
Your mom. Yeah.
So with that said, thank you so much. Like, this has just been such a powerful conversation. I hope that it's the beginning of many more, because when we start here, we're going to continue, because what's next starts here. So hope you all enjoyed this episode of Nuestra Esquina. Get ready for the next segment.